Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. I'm Morgan Hayes. I'm an assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering at the University of Kentucky. And in my personal life, my husband and I farm in Boyle County, Kentucky. We have a commercial cattle and hay operation. We've got about 500 acres.
I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems and Agriculture Engineering. We raise registered Angus cattle on our farm in Mercer County, and we also focus on some hay production.
Hey, Josh. So we're going to start Have You Heard today with our typical what's been happening on the farm this week. Give me the updates. It's been an interesting week.
Okay, so for this week, we actually went and did our Preg testing. So we did a lot of our Preg testing, so we're waiting to get our results back. Hopefully sometime today or tomorrow, we'll hear back on the results. We also went ahead and while we had them there, we vaccinated, and we also wormed them. Didn't put fly tags in. If we had fly tags, I would have probably put them in. Just because, just to be one and done.
Yeah, it's sort of a tricky time of the year where, in theory, there are enough flies that you could probably put in a fly tag in right now. On the other hand, they're only effective for so long, and if it's kind of a funky later summer season, having ineffective fly tags in September can be really problematic, and it may require you to put a second tag in. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but those tags are $3 to $5 a tag. So to re-tag an animal is a pretty significant amount of money. If you only have one tag, if you have two tags, one in each year, then it's quite a bit of money.
Quite a bit of money.
We
usually spring for the two. Because I'm usually spring for the two and trying to prevent it just pink eye across the board. Because by the time you treat for pink eye, it's worth the tags.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly true. Some of the tags only suggest using one, and some of the tags suggest using two. So for anyone that doesn't know, fly tags are a treated tag that has a product on it to discourage flies from landing near the face of the cow and spreading pink eye. There are, I believe, 4 commercial ones on the market right now, or 4 different treatments on different tags. There's multiple tags, but 4 different chemicals in there that can be used, and you're supposed to rotate through them. Some people are very consistent and they always use one type of tag. We do try to rotate our tags, and we have not put them in yet either. We almost always put them in around the second week of May. If we can push it a little later, we will, but usually by the second week of May, it's time to get tags in ears.
See, where it's been so cool, the flies haven't been, it's been cool, so they've been, bursts of flies, but it hasn't been, the typical, they say 100 flies on the back is when you really need to go in there and put a fly tag on.
And so we also haven't done that yet. So we're sort of still waiting as well. So we'll have another round of getting cattle up just to put tags. Although we have some vaccines to give, and we've actually held off on the vaccinations until we do fly tags. So we did our pregnancy testing earlier, a couple weeks before you. That's going to allow us to cull some animals and not put fly tags or vaccines in animals that are open. We're pretty cheap. We're being honest about it. Yeah. But that's how weeks go. Some weeks are like that you get done what you can, and when you have them up, it's easier to get a lot of things done.
It's easy just to do it all at once and be like, you know what, see you later. If it's a problem, it's a problem. It just depends on where you want to put the work in.
That's right. Yeah, because there's going to be work regardless of how you manage it.
Yep.
So today, this week, I'm trying to think what we've done on our farm this week. We've had a pretty busy week.
Fencing, finish up calving?
We did finish up some fencing. We did have a couple more calves. Our calf watch, we're still sitting with 2 cows to calve. In theory, we should be done by the 15th, so a little over 10 days away from the end of calving. But realistically, we can add another week on that because they can hold out longer than you think. Ironically, we had 1 calf come last year in June, which is extremely late because I know when we pulled the bull out, I still wonder if possibly we had a neighbor's bull.
Just help you out there.
And he just helped us out there, but it was an unexpectedly late calving. We don't expect to see that this year, but we've got 2 more that we're watching, and I would expect they'll come not in the next couple of days, but in the next.
Okay.
So we've got 2 left to calve. Those animals are out on pasture. We're trying to keep them up closer to our working facility still, just in case there were any issues. So we're going to talk today about rotational system, but they've been on a short rotation. They haven't gone to the back of the because we don't want them to have to work that way forward if there was any issues having. So
Right.
sort of a short cycle on our rotation, which will be fine because grass is finally looking like it's taking off. We're also evaluating hay cutting. I think we took a look at it last night again, and we may do some early cutting here in the next 10 days.
Yep.
Hopefully next week if it dries out after this weekend. It's been kind of wet this week for anyone that's not here in central Kentucky. We've had rain or chance of rain pretty much every day. Today's the one day that there wasn't really much of a chance of rain, but it's like
Overcast. It's just overcast.
It's just very humid and overcast currently. I don't think it's drying today for any stretch of the imagination. So if next week it does get warm enough and dry enough, we will cut. It'll be early. It won't be a thick cutting. We won't get high volume off of it, but it will clean up the field for a nice second cutting. We're certainly getting enough rain right now to push all of those materials back out of the ground. So that's sort of our plan right now, is to do a second cutting early as well and try and stay ahead of that one of our higher quality hay fields.
I know ours is heading out already. The fescue's heading out. It's kind of stemmy, so I'm definitely thinking about go ahead and cutting it and then putting down a little bit of juice to it, a little bit of fertilizer.
Yeah, we've talked the same thing. This first cutting, and it's probably partially the weather and also partially that we took a risk on not fertilizing our fields, but it's come in a little bit spotty. It's not thick, it's not super thin, but I think a number of those warm cold swings have caused the grass to come in sort of a not ideal first cutting. So getting it cleaned up, and then we also have tremendous weed pressure on a field that doesn't traditionally have a lot of weed pressure. I don't think it's actually coming off of our farm. I think it's coming off. We have some neighboring farms where they rain and they don't have cover on it this winter, and I think that they've pushed up some weeds into our hay fields, which stinks, but it is part of life. So we're just kind of living with that right now. Anyway, that's sort of where we're at. We're evaluating our hay. We're rotating cattle at this point. We've got one group of cattle that are pushing through the hay a little faster than we would, or the grass a little faster than we would want. Trying to decide if we have to put out a roll or two, slow them down before we recycle them back onto the first pastures they were on. So
we're still feeding some hay to ours because I'm pushing, like, well, we still got the hay from last year. I'm pushing the hay to them, just giving those fields a chance to really take off well, and then I know they're going to go in there and hit it hard.
And the other thing I will say is that we do have hay back stored, but we even sold a few rolls here late in the year, and I think a lot of people are nervous about how much hay is going to cost this coming year. So we're sort of sitting on a little bit of hay, but we're not afraid to feed it next year. We have a good mineral program, pretty comfortable with rolled hay that's been stored inside.
Okay.
So that's sort of where we're at right now. We're figuring out our systems, but let's actually talk about our rotational systems. That's our topic for the day. And why don't we, maybe start off with, on the rotational systems, how many groups you rotate and how often you like to rotate, and then we'll talk a little bit about the fencing too.
So we have a couple different farms, like the way they're set up differently. So the one farm is set up in a pinwheel design. So it has a pond smack dab in the center of the farm, and then we put a water tank right below that. And so that's kind of our nexus point for a lot of our rotational grazing to take place. So that's where they come, they get the mineral there, and also their water. And they have access to 3 or 4 fields just from that one area. And so that farm is where we usually typically have our spring herd over the summer, and then they're about 5 to 10 acre pastures or thereabouts. And then we also have one more forested section if we wanted to clean up the forest. There's a little bit of grass that probably lasts them a day or two, but that's also available on the farm. But we typically rotate every 2 weeks or so. And so trying to make sure they hit it hard. Whatever they do, they hit hard. And then we even do some subdivisions within that. So a lot of it was high tensile electric fence, and then due to the goats, we've changed it to high tensile woven wire fence, or the 6-knot high tensile. Yeah, 6-knot high tensile fence. And so, but we still have that electric line on the inside. So we're going to put up our electric fence and then run that as hot, and then subdivide from there.
And you said you have that set up so that you could have both the goats and your spring herd of cows on.
Yes. And
Do you run them together on that property, or are they in separate groups on that property? Goats sort of do whatever they want, so I'm kind of curious to hear the answer to this.
Inadvertently, we have them originally designated as separate, but they occasionally commingle by goat's choice.
Yeah. I would believe that. And actually, there's some data out there that suggests that actually grazing them together can be pretty effective. I think there's some data that says you can even graze 1 or 2 goats with a cow and not damage a pasture. You have to be cognizant that there are some animals in there and really do your rotation correctly, but they will eat some of the grasses that the cows avoid.
Yep.
So that you can sometimes actually use that as a weed control and avoiding some bush hogging by running them as a paired set. There's some risks with disease with doing that as well, though, and depending on how susceptible they are to certain worms and other things, you might hesitate to do that with your goats. On the other hand, if you're worming your cattle well and doing the right management on your cattle and the right management on your goats, I can see some real promise in that, which is.
And surprisingly, our strategy is going to be, we've talked about it a little bit, put the goats in there first, let them hit the stuff. They like to hit stuff that's high, so don't let them get down close so they're not really cleaning up the worm eggs, I guess. Right. And then let the cows come in, since they've been worm, come in there and just vacuum it up, essentially clean it up the pasture. So that was kind of our thought process. We'll see if it works.
Yeah.
But our thought process was have the goats go in there first, knock down what they can. They've actually done a fairly good job. Any cedars, rose bushes, anything along the fence lines.
Do they do good on bush honeysuckle? Yeah, I'm fighting bush honeysuckle this spring.
I haven't seen bush honeysuckle yet. I had to put them out there, but they've done fairly well with some of the junk trees. A lot of the junk trees that we have, they've been able to clean up, about 4 or 5 foot up.
Interesting.
However high they can reach, they've done a good job cleaning up.
Okay.
So that's part of it. So we have that one farm, and that's part of our rotation strategy. Another farm where we keep the 50, 60 head, I'll rotate them through maybe a 17 or so acre. So 17 acres broken up into 4 paddocks. I'll rotate them through there fairly quickly and then send them on to another 2 15-acre fields. And then from there, we'll rotate to another 15-acre field and a couple other 15-acre fields, and trying to, we're really pushing them as far as like hitting hard and fast, and then just keep rotating. Then at some point in the summer, I'll put them onto towards the end of the summer, a square hay field that I have. And so it's adjacent to the pastures. And so I'll put them there and kind of just clean up. It's bad about getting Johnson grass, so they'll go in there and take care of it fairly quickly.
And how long is your longest time that they're in any of the pastures likely?
It depends. And so there's been, in pastures, we had really good growth in the spring. I could have them on that 17-acre pasture or 17-acre rotation with the paddocks. I've had them on there for a month.
Okay.
And so if I've had but that was in pastures we had really good fertilizer, really good growth. And so depending on the year, it'll vary. So this year it won't be anywhere near that long. It'll probably be 2 weeks at most.
Okay. Yeah, our goal on most of our farms is about a week on our rotations. So cattle that are on the home place have pastures that are 10 and 15 acres, and that group gets rotated weekly pretty consistently. There are seasons that will rotate more often, and then we've got one larger field that we rotate to. This is the group, our spring group that I said we haven't pushed to the back yet. And that bigger field gets split in half with hot wire. So most of our fencing is electrified, but it's 5 wire, 3 hot.
Yep.
Some of it's actually 4 wire hot, all hot. It just depends on how we have it set up. And a lot of this was done on NRCS projects, on EQIP projects, and some other cost share programs. So we have a lot of rotational permanent fencing up. And all of that just depends on when it went through and what the approved designs were at the time the fencing went up. So, but all of that fencing, some of that's actually state cost share money as well. But all of that got done. So that's pretty good. And then the 15 acres, 16 acres in the back, we split with a single wire fence. So
Okay.
that's also pretty useful. I like using single wire. I like doing temporary fencing, but I like not having it everywhere because that gives us some flexibility. So at times when we know that we're not going to have time to move temporary fencing, this gives us the option to set it up and only take it down once or twice during the summer rather than have to take it down every week, it back up again.
So yeah, we actually have a single wire on 2 of our bigger pastures that we have.
Yeah.
So and they're typically up. I say we leave them up 24. Well, pretty much stay up most of the year. And so we'll just go in there. We'll actually take them up at some point, relatively midsummer, so probably about July, but sometime potentially here soon. Take them up, bush hog real low, and then put it back up. And then that usually gets us, like, knocks down most of the weeds, gets the grass, and they'll take care of it after we knock it down that first time.
Sometimes we have good luck with that, and sometimes we do not get good grazing under that single wire fence, or even under our more permanent hot fences. Sometimes we get good grazing underneath there, and sometimes we do not. It's a little bit of a toss up which way it's going to go. So, but either way, it's working for us. The rented farm, the one that I said was maybe running a little bit quick. That group was running through their grass a little bit quicker than we would want. That ground just hasn't been maintained as well. And it's a leased piece of ground that's not on a long-term lease, and that makes fertilizing it more difficult. Bush hogging is about the only strategy that we're willing to do for weed management, try and get higher quality grasses in there. Honestly, it's a farm that would be perfect if we had goats. It has some very tough grasses to get cattle to eat. So, and we don't push our cattle hard enough to force them to eat them. But as a result, it's hard to get better grasses growing in those fields because nothing is taking down the grasses they don't want to eat, and we have to bush hog to manage it.
Yeah.
So that one is a little bit trickier, but we do rotate there as well. That one's a trickier farm. We only have one water tank, so there are some fields that they don't graze very because they do walk more than that recommended 800 feet. They instead walk 1,000 or 1,500 feet to water, or could be even more depending on what portion of the thing they're. So.
And ours has been 2 of the. Well, I guess the one system is fed by the pond, but it's a pond tank, so they all have access to that one nexus point. But the other 2 are direct ponds. So other pastures are directly fed by the pond, so they just go to the pond and drink.
Yeah, the watering is probably the one tricky part about a rotational system that a lot of people don't always talk about. Running water is expensive. That's one reason we have cost share on a lot of our interior fencing that's for rotational systems was to get water.
Gotten even more expensive.
And it has gotten significantly more expensive. PVC pipe prices are outrageously expensive right now, and I recognize that is a really difficult decision to make right now to put in water. Using some form of an existing pond, either by itself or in combination with a tank, probably a much better strategy right now with the cost of
pipe being at least triple.
Yeah, so that is a real trick. We were very lucky that we finished all of our projects. Finished the last of our watering projects in. So we don't have any more water tanks that are slated to go in on any of our farms. That doesn't mean that we won't end up doing more watering systems, but we have paid for a lot of pipe, but fortunately we did it before the major jump in pricing, where cost share was a lot more effective.
Yes.
And that is not a bash on NRCS or any group that's doing the cost share programs. They priced everything out and the prices have just escalated very quickly. Cost share just hasn't been able to keep up with the pricing on materials. And that's, it stinks though for a person that has reached an agreement to do cost share and signed contract, and then the pricing on the materials has changed so drastically within the 3 years or 5 years on their contract that they're struggling to get things done.
Yep.
But I wish I had a great solution for all of that, and I don't. That is one thing I will say is though that using the cost share was probably the reason that we have so many waters that we don't have to most of our farms bring them back to one centralized point. And it's just lucky that we were able to get the to do those rotational systems. It made a lot of our fencing projects make a lot of our rotation projects make. We are seeing the benefits of rotation. So I don't want to just say that we're rotating and it's frustrating, because in some ways rotation takes more work, but we also do run more animals than some of our neighbors that don't rotate.
Yep.
We do run at a higher stocking density, which does help us pay for the farms. We also do have better grass. So where we've had a few smaller droughts in late summer, we have been able to graze through a lot of them, where some of others have had to bring in hay much earlier. So all of that is a positive. Plus, because we sometimes use our hay fields and our pasture ground interchangeably, we have even been able to cut where we were sort of ahead of the game, knowing we were going into a drought, to capture some of that dry matter before it got dry and burnt up. So we actually got extra hay off even on a drought year, just because we were able to take it where the ground really started cracking. So all of that is a benefit of having a rotational system. So in no way would I suggest do not have a rotational system, because I think the benefits of it are very clear, at least here in Kentucky. But with that, there is a lot of work associated. Just getting the right fencing system that matches and the right rotational time periods. For us, a week is reasonable. We can rotate more often than that, but if we're rotating more than every 4 days, it's too much. And if we have to rotate and it's longer than 10 days, we'll think about splitting a field up into 2 sections. We tend to just not get good even grazing out of our group. I don't know why. I don't know if they're just picky, or if it's a little bit just that they haven't been trained to have to clean up an area, or that they just have enough space that they can be selective. And I think it's a lot that
selective grazing.
And they will be very selective. So interestingly, they'll be selective against clover if given the choice, which is an odd decision, one that you wouldn't think they will select against clover. So for us, a week is almost always our target, and we have to sort of estimate when we look at a field and decide if it's going to be significantly over a week, if it's growing really good, or if it's appropriate.
And I think, the other thing we try to think about too is just the rest period. Sometimes if there's been a time or two where we haven't been able to rotate animals just due to, everybody's doing something else. We're cutting hay. We're all running around doing something. And then if they're on that, instead of 2 weeks, it's 3 weeks, then they made it into a golf course,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one thing we are pretty careful about. And I'm sure you are too, because once you overgraze it, it's very hard to get it regrowth. I mean, at this time of the year, if you overgrazed it right now in May, it's going to come back.
Yeah.
But if you overgraze it in late June, early July, it might not come back until September.
Yeah.
So the later we get in the year, the more important it is to get that rotation right. We farm, our family helps us. It's on some of our family land. Sometimes they like to help, but it's very interesting because you always have to train people to see pasture the way you do. If someone else is going to make the rotation decision, because some people see 3 blades of tall grass and they say there's more grass to eat, but that's not how you actually should be measuring. If anyone has not been to a grazing school and would like to go, I would strongly encourage it. Using a grazing stick, estimating your dry matter and your pasture, all of that is a really fascinating experience. And you can do it both technically by measuring it, but also you can get a feel for how just by sight. And the better you get at it, the easier it is to guess what's going to happen. But it's always very interesting.
Yep. And it's just, I think the 2 R's, where they always stress is rotate, rest, and the rest being the most important, like rest, then rotate again.
Yeah, and for what you're saying and having some 2-week sections and how many sections you probably have 5 to 6 weeks of rest a lot of the time.
Yep.
A lot of ours have 4 to 5 weeks of rest. So we probably cycle back a little bit quicker than you do, but that might also be why we're very careful not to overgraze, because if we overgraze, we end up in big trouble on our next round. and we can't afford that. A little bit of a trick. We do end up bush hogging sometimes twice a summer just because we do move them so quickly. We will leave some tall stuff in that we need some goat. I don't know. That would be radical though.
Yeah, I had the crazy thing was we had a sheep that would take out the ironweed, and so the goats don't seem to be as enthusiastic. But we had a sheep. I don't know whether he was just unique, but we did have a sheep, and he would just take out that. So wherever he was a pet sheep. But clarify, he was a pet sheep, but he didn't really like any broadleaves or the ironweed. He would just go to town on them. So maybe the goats will take care of it. If not, maybe we'll just get a couple of Katahdins or something and throw them out there and see if they take care of it for us.
I think that's a good strategy. I'm curious to see your images with all your small ruminants wandering around doing whatever they want around all those cows that are spoiled rotten. It'll be an entertaining little menagerie you have going on.
Just make it work. Whatever it is, it has to work for you, and hopefully this works for us, or we'll figure something else out.
Yeah, that's a good plan. So that's our rotational systems, at least an overview of them. Probably come back in if we have questions from anyone on these. Talk a little bit more about details of it. You want to just give an update on what's happening in the next week on the farm for you?
So we made the hard decision. We decided to get baler belts. So, made that hard decision. I was like, man, I wish we made that hard decision 2 years ago. But we looked at it and we were losing belts, and so we had to make that decision at some point. So working on that, still like a couple of little extra fixes on the baler. Fixes on the rake, and then I think we're planning to, kind of like what you were saying, go ahead and get our first cut hopefully next week. We'll see. So depending on the weather, we'll talk to Matt Dixon, get his opinion, then rock and roll. Then if everything goes wrong, we'll just blame Matt.
That's right. I think that's a good plan. I think we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go talk to Matt together. When he tells us it's going to be dry and then it rains, we're going to be very angry with him. We don't stone anyone in this department, but he's close at some ways. Just kidding. Other than that, we are going to sell some of our calves that we weaned in March. So that group is going off in the next week. A couple steers we're going to keep and maintain for finishing, and then a couple heifers we're going to retain ownership on to bred. So we've got a few animals that we're keeping, but the majority of the group is leaving in the next week. Market is still sort of it's strong but sort of squishy right now. And I'm not sure what's happening. The market's just a little bit variable between if you're watching the market right now, there's a little bit of variability between sale days, even within the same week with different markets, which we don't always see, but right now it just seems to be a little bit about who the buyer is on that day at that stockyard. So we'll see what kind of pricing we can get and do our best on that. But now is the time to get rid of them because feed prices are high, and they are getting grain and hay, and they are growing excellently, but they're expensive to keep feeding right now. And as we get into hay season, it's just another group that we have to manage. So we'll try and get the majority of them going to take down workload.
Goals to get a couple sold, but probably later on in May.
Okay. So ours is hopefully they're leaving next week on Tuesday.
All right.
So we'll see. We'll see if that happens. When we come back next week, we'll let you know. Aside from that, I think it's going to be just another... Oh, and we are also working on hay binds. So we're also working on equipment, a little bit of final work. We've got functional machines, and then we have some parts machines. Pulling parts off of the parts machine. We may actually chunk out the rest of the metal that's on them that's not a viable part. Steel prices are pretty good right now. Things recycle.
Yep.
So that might also be.
Makes sense. Yeah.
All that to say, it's another week on the farm, and we will see you guys next week for another video.
Take care.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.